Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today as part of the AWS Innovate Online Conference. My name is Chris Munns. I am currently a senior and the lead developer advocate for Serverless here at AWS. I am broadcasting to you here on Twitch from the New York City offices for AWS, where I'm based out of. And so in today's session, we're going to cover a number of different topics. And if you've been following along for the last day here, you've seen some really interesting talks. But what we're going to cover here today is building an application using a couple of what I think are really awesome, very much cutting edge technologies that allow you to do some really exciting things. We're going to be building a web application using the React JavaScript framework. It's going to talk to a couple of AWS technologies on the back end. We're going to have our reactive web page powered by a GraphQL API that's going to be hosted by a service of ours called AppSync. We're going to store data in DynamoDB. We're going to make use of Kognito for authentication. And so we're going to glue all of these things together. It's going to be a jam-packed hour here. So thanks again for joining me. I've got Twitch in front of me here so that we can interact back and forth. So I'm going to take breaks. So please do ask questions. Throw up a hand here and let me know if there's anything that I can help you out with. And we'll try to cover as much as we can in this short period of time. So with that, let's get into it. So for today, all the work that I'm going to be doing is going to be via something called AWS Cloud9. Now, Cloud9 is an IDE that we have here at AWS, cloud-based IDE, really deeply integrated with the AWS platform. So what I've already kind of done here, much like all great cooking shows, I'm going to take some dough and put it in the top oven and pull out a baked cake from the bottom oven. And so I've pre-configured an environment here. I have again, Cloud9 instance up and running. Cloud9 does run inside of EC2. And so what it'll allow me to do is interface again with the AWS environment without having to install a bunch of tools on my own workstation, which is actually kind of awesome, I think. So I've got this environment here again. I've got the ability to edit text files. I've got the ability to interface with a terminal window. And I've got all of the kind of traditional tools and stuff that you would expect me to have, in order to do development. So let's get started. Again, we're going to be doing everything pretty much today in code. And so the first thing I'm going to do, and best practice here, is I'm actually going to go to Aws Code Commit, which is a Git hosting service that we have. And so I've logged into the AWS console at console.awsamazon.com. I've gone to the Code Commit service. And what I'm going to do here is create a repository for today. So we'll do AWS Innovate Twitch. We'll call this GraphQL. A little bit of a long repo name, but that's how we're rolling today. Create this repository. We have the ability to do something which here is basically to set up notifications for activities. We're going to pass on this for today's demo and kind of keep on trucking. And so now we're going to go here and I'm going to clone this repository into my Cloud9 environment. So here we go. All right, so I have cloned an empty repository. That is totally fine. So we've got an empty repository. It's all set up here. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing inside of my console. So I see your question here. Yes, AWS does have a Git service. It's got a lot of cool capabilities, and we'll go back and forth and looking at what's going on there as well here today. So I'm inside of my directory. I can do git status. There's no commits here. Let's bring some code into this blank repository and get started. And now in this environment, I already have Node.js installed. I already have Python installed, all the major languages that you'd probably want to do development in. I've got package managers installed. And so I have already installed NPX, the tools for JavaScript, so that I can run React inside of this environment. And so let me actually just come back here and I'm going to do an NPX create. Actually, let me go into my directory. Let's do npx create -react -app. And the app that we're going to create today is going to be called Office Events. And basically what it's going to allow us to do, as we'll see here, is we're going to create a internal app for our company that will allow us to manage events for a company, staff events, birthdays, holidays that we want to celebrate as a team. And so, a way for us as employees inside of a company to interact with each other. So let's hit enter here. And so what this is going to do is pull in various libraries, bootstrap my React environment. This should just take a couple of seconds here. It's pulling in all of the various things that it needs. It's going to create a whole bunch of code for me, which is awesome. Going to make my life a little bit easier in terms of not needing to create a lot of stuff by hand here today. And so we're going to be using React again for the JavaScript for our site. Someone said scroll, please.
Maybe the video.
I see. When this is done running, I will hit enter down a couple times and you'll be able to see what it was that I was typing. I understand that you see my face. So the command that I just ran was npx create react, or npx create -react -app. And then I named it office-events. So it's this line that you see right here. And so again, this is doing a whole bunch of stuff, actually not super important, pulling down a whole bunch of data from the internet onto my instance here. So this should take just a small period of time. And actually one thing I will do is I'm going to collapse that sidebar there to the left, see if we can give us a little more real estate. Okay. Waiting just a little bit longer. Almost done. Pulling in some things. Boom. Awesome. Okay, so what this has done is we'll go back into our directory here. It's pulled a whole bunch of stuff into here, created a whole bunch of things inside of our app here, Office Events. We've got a bunch of Node modules. It's pulled in all the dependencies that it needs for Node. We've got then some static resources. We've also got our source code. And so inside of this, we have a kind of vanilla React application here. Nothing really kind of too exciting going on. And so what I can do is I can come back to another terminal window here inside my Cloud9 environment. And I'm going to go into my directory. So I'm going to go into AWS Innovate. I'm going to go into Office Events. And I'm going to start a local npm server so that I can look at this application. So I'm just going to run npm start. And actually, hold on a second. I see people can't see what I'm doing. So npm start. Okay, so this is going to start up the local, basically, instance of Node running, supporting this web application. And again, this is just the blank vanilla React application from creating a new project. Now, pretty cool. What I can do here in Cloud9 is I can click on Preview and say Preview Running Application. And what it's going to do is it's going to give me here my React application running. And sorry, my face might be appearing over part of it here. But this is, again, just the vanilla basic React application. What's cool, though, is I can come back in here to the code editor, and I can say, you know what, I don't really need this to get started thing here. So I'm just going to erase all that, and I'm going to put in a header that just says, yo, because why not? Save that, come back over, and it's updated my app. And so I can edit code, live see changes, and that's pretty awesome. And again, this is going to be the foundation of my reactive website. So at this point, we basically have a front-end component. Now we need to work on extending out to a back-end component. So here at AWS, again, we've got all sorts of different services. One that I'm going to now go and spend a little bit of time with is a service of ours called AWS Mobile Hub. And so inside of Mobile Hub, you have a concept of projects. And what these projects do is they allow you to basically bind a number of other AWS services into, again, a project construct. And so while it says here Mobile Hub, this also means both for mobile applications. So for example, things like iOS applications, as well as web-based applications. And so that's obviously the focus of today. Now, beyond the web interface that we have here that we can do all sorts of cool stuff in, and again, there's a bunch of really interesting getting started guides, is that there's also a really useful CLI tool for this. And so let me go back over to my Cloud9 instance over here. Let me actually go back into this environment. And so I'm going to go into my Office Events. And so you know what, hold on one second here. Let's just do this. Cool. Basically, I just changed my command line so that I don't have the full string of everything here, so you can see a little more easily what it is that I'm typing, and half the terminal window isn't eaten up by, what you see is the what's called the PS1 in Linux. Awesome. So I am inside of my directory here. And again, we've got this command called Aws Mobile. It's a CLI toolkit for these mobile services and essentially these web services that exist. Let's just not run it with anything to see what it does here. And so we see here that, again, allows us to incorporate a bunch of AWS features into a project. There are a whole bunch of commands built into this. Start, init, pull, push, delete, etc., etc. We're going to be interfacing with some of these today, but not all of them. And now, I'm inside of my my Office events directory where I have my reactive app. And so what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to init or initialize a new project inside of this same directory. And this is going to, again, give me some of the backend components managed from inside of this application. And I broke it. That's not supposed to happen. Well, you got me, because this worked about 35 minutes ago. So, 1 second here. Let me grab mobile. So let me just actually figure out if for some reason I do not have this installed right now in this environment. We're going to go through and just do a quick reinstall. So Aws Mobile is a NPM package for the CLI. And so it's going to go in here and install. Okay, so now that is in there. And let's try this one more time. Let's try configure first. That's okay, and that's okay, and that's okay. Okay. So, 1 second here. I know exactly what happened. So the Aws Mobile command line prefers that you have Node.js v8 installed, and I just had to basically switch this environment to use that. So now that that is all good, cross our fingers, and we're business. Cool. So we're going to basically assume that the defaults that the Aws Mobile CLI has for us here are all good. And so we're just going to enter a bunch of times. So we're going to use the source directory, which again is what React created for me. If there's any artifacts that we need to build, it's going to use a build directory. What is the command for that? npm run script builds, just defaults. What's the run command? You could use npm run script start. And then it's what is the Aws Mobile project name that I would like to use. In this case, I'm going to call it Office Events Innovate. And so now what it's going to do is it's going to talk back to Mobile Hub and kick off kind of creating the initial scaffolding for me to interface with all these different backend services. Now, one of the cool things about Mobile Hub that it does, it actually gives me kind of the full hosting environment for my JavaScript-based application. So it's going to create an S3 bucket. It's going to create a CloudFront distribution. It's going to create a couple other different things for me automatically on the AWS side. Again, I'm all doing this just on running this command without having to go into the console and click all over the place. And so it says we're all good. If you look here on the left, it's actually created a couple other directories for me here. It has an Aws Mobile JS directory. It's put a couple other files here in the root of my application directory. But let's go back to the Aws Mobile Hub console, and let's just give this a refresh here. And so now we actually see the Office Events project created. So let's click into this. And what we see down here so far, we don't have yet a published app that's configured. We have a couple backend services that are pre-created for us. So we have a messaging and analytics aspect of this that's created. We also already have hosting and streaming set up. So again, it's giving us a Amazon S3 bucket, simple storage service bucket. It's also giving us an Amazon CloudFront distribution, the CDN service, so that if we were to push this application live and out there, it would be hosted and fronted by the 100+ points of presence that our CDN service has. Now, Mobile Hub provides a number of other backend components that we could include. And we could actually do this here from the console if we so felt like. We could add these different capabilities and pull them into here. Or we could, again, use the AWS Mobile CLI tool, which we're primarily going to focus with here today. But there's a whole bunch of capabilities here. You see, for example, conversational bots. That's pretty cool, too. And I would definitely encourage you to come in and try to explore doing this here. So, again, we have our repository set up here. One other thing I'm going to pull up here is inside of our source directory, it created a file called aws-exports.javascript. And what this actually does is it creates, again, it's a file here that's got a bunch of variables or essentially attributes about our application that are predefined. And so we see things here about, for example, the bucket that it's going to be serving my resources out of when I publish to them. Things like Cognito identity pools, which we'll be talking about here in a little bit, mobile analytics IDs, project names, regions, and so forth. And so we'll see here how this file plays in throughout the demo of helping us bind together all these resources without, again, us having to do a whole lot of work. So coming back here again, we've got a reactive application. It's pretty basic and straightforward. Let's actually take this reactive application and send it up to AWS, up into the cloud, as it were, and get it hosted. And so I can do AWS Mobile Publish. And this is going to take all of the files and stuff that I have here in this repository, ship them up to my S3 bucket, and make them available. And so the React app that was, again, just that basic placeholder that I tested here is now being sent up to that S3 bucket and made available for us. And so we know now that the application is available. And let's actually just pull it up from the S3 bucket location. And again, we see here my very awesome web app, the default React web app, throwing out here a yo exclamation, and that's all good. And again, this is hosted in the S3 bucket. If you can see here in the top here of this URL, we see that's got this kind of funky domain that goes .s3-website.us-east-1.amazon.aws.com. If we come back into Mobile Hub and we go down to hosting and streaming, and we click through here, we'll also see that it shows this being our S3 bucket. We say this is for testing only. And then we have our CloudFront distribution, which we can open up here. But it's still being configured right now, and so we're not going to worry about that. But anyway, our code is live. It's up in the cloud. Other people can come and test this, and this is good. And actually, what I'm going to do is I am also in Twitch. So excuse me real quick here. I'm going to publish that link. So you all should be able to go and see this link, and we'll see what horrible damage and things we can do to this website throughout the rest of today's demo. And sorry for the window thing here. Okay, awesome. So we've built our reactive app. We have set up our backend for storing and holding all of that. We've published our app now in its current state. And so let's go forward now and do a little bit more. Now, what we want to get to at some point here today is that we're going to have a GraphQL backend for our application, for Office Events application. And we're going to want to set up some sort of user authentication for it. And again, I'm going to let you all play along at home with this, as it were. Again, we have a service here at AWS called Kognito. Kognito allows for user management through a couple of different ways, but it can basically be a completely managed user database backend. So instead of you ever having to have a users table in a database that has username and password and first name and last name and blah, 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 you can use Kognito to completely manage this for you. It's got a lot of cool capabilities around things like multi-factor authentication, password resets, all sorts of good stuff. And so let's go on here and set up Kognito for this application. And so again, I'm going to use the AWS Mobile CLI for this. And I'm going to say user sign in enable-p. Okay. And so I could go with the default settings. What the default settings are going to do, though, is be a little bit more than what I need for today. And so I'm actually going to go to the advanced settings, and I'm going to water down some of the security for today's application. So again, Kognito provides a number of different capabilities. It allows us to completely, have it manage resources for us in terms of our user accounts and so forth. Or as you see here, all the way in the bottom of the screen, you can see that I can set up Facebook sign-in, Google sign-in. That would require me to go to those their company sites and set up an identifier and a bunch of other stuff. So I'm not going to do that. So I am going to use Kognito user pools. Now I get to select basically how it is that my users are logging in. And so I could say username, I could say email, I could say phone number, which is required for multi-factor. I'm just going to go with email. And then I get to set my password constraints. And so I'll take a minimum length of 8. That seems good. But in terms of the things that we need to require, I'm going to just say that it has to require, actually, you know what, we'll do this. We'll do uppercase, lowercase, and numbers, just for sake of argument today. All right, so we've configured that, but we've only configured it here inside of our application environment. And so we have to basically take these settings and push them back up to the AWS Mobile Services backend. So we do AWS Mobile Push, and now it's going to connect to the backend project, and it's going to push this up for us. And so I'm going to take a second here to take a look at Twitch. If you have any questions, send them on over, and I'm happy to try to address them. So there's a question here of which environment am I publishing from? So this just says that it's a testing environment, but there really isn't, in this case, a true sense of environments. Typically, I'd want to have something like a CI and CD pipeline and be doing this the right way, right? So have completely separate environments for whatever the different environments are that I want to qualify for before production. Thank you for those who are trying to help me with the mobile configure, the AWS mobile command initially. I appreciate that, and thank you. Okay, any other questions? Nope. So someone's asking about dark mode. So this is just in Cloud 9 that I can configure my IDE. I can do all sorts of things with this about setting up the preferences here. So Cloud 9 preferences, general user interface. I think it's down under one of the settings here that allows me to change the color of it. But this is not the rest of the AWS console. This is just my environment that I am typing in for an IDE. While we're doing this, real quick, we should be practicing best practices here for our Git command. And so what I am going to do is I see here that I have all sorts of stuff going on. So I'm going to add office events. I am going to commit this. Oops. Oh, that's right. I have to configure this environment. So 1 second. Just gotta configure Git. Okay, that is me. All right, take 2. All right, so I'm adding that. I'm gonna push that up. And now that is going up to code commit where my code is stored. Okay, backing up one step here. So I configured authentication inside of my application in terms of configuring the Kognito service, but I haven't done anything else with it yet. If I come back here to Mobile Hub and go back to the root of my project and give this a little refresh here, what I'll see now here in the middle is that in terms of backend services that I have configured, user sign-in is now one of the things that is now configured. I can come in here, I see that this is using Kognito for email and password. I can see how my password requirements are, so minimum length of 8. Uppercase, lowercase, and numbers are required. You sign in with a username, and multi-factor is disabled. I could actually go all the way into the Kognito console and play the whole bunch of other settings and stuff for this, but in the case of today, I don't need to. But what I do need to do now is find a way to take this super awesome React app that I have and add user credentials and authentication to it. So what I'm going to do is configure this inside of my React application using another set of React tools that we have called Aws Amplify. So Amplify is a JavaScript library. It's a little bit bigger. That also has a bunch of really deep integrations with the AWS environment. It's going to play here with React, with other tools like Vue, in terms of like other JavaScript frameworks that are out there. And so we can do a whole bunch of different things with it. Now, what I first want to do here is set up my authentication. And so I'm going to go here quickly to the docs. I'm going to find the doc for authentication. And I'm going to go and scroll down here. So we're going to use Amazon Cognito. And now it's going to say, oh, you want to install these things. You need to do this, 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 and this. And in this case, I already have the AWS Mobile CLI installed and a couple other things. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some lines here to my React application to import this library and get it set up. So let's go down here. Okay. So this is going to import the Amplify library. It's going to pull in from AWS exports. Again, that JavaScript file that was created by the AWS mobile tools, my settings. So it's going to pull in that. I'm going to get rid of this comment here. And then it's going to configure Amplify using the AWS exports libraries. Let me just save this real quick. If I come back over to AWS exports, it's actually updated itself with a couple of other configuration parameters here, attributes, automatically. So the Cloud9 IDE refreshed this for me because I didn't have it open at that time. And it added in here these AWS user pool configuration settings. So that's cool. So awesome. So I've got this configured. Let me go back here to the instructions. And so we don't need to customize sign-in options. We don't need to customize attributes. We don't need to do a manual setup. We don't need to worry about Node.js support. We are going to do cool things with sign-in and stuff. But actually, if I go over here on the left and I scroll, let me see if I scroll on down here. I'm going to scoot past all this. Using with Authenticator HOC, or high order component. So Amplify has a bunch of what are considered high order components for interfacing with React. And so what's pretty cool here is I can go and just basically include these modules automatically from here. And so Amplify has a bunch of pre-created forms, UI components and stuff that I can just basically plop right into a React application without having to write a whole bunch of code and a whole bunch of CSS and JavaScript and blah, 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 blah. And so it's going to make my life even easier in working with React and working with these AWS services. And so I am going to come in here and I'm going to say import with Authenticator AWS Amplify React. Let's come back in here, plop that in there. And then if I do this export default with Authenticator app, I can actually come in and put this below my, actually, sorry. This goes down here. Make sure I have the line right. Export default app. Yep, sorry. Sorry, I'm going to actually replace the export with that. That's right. And then I remember from my notes that I need to do one other thing here. My apologies here. I've got a little stack of notes that I'm cheating with here, which basically says to do... Actually, let's just do this. Let's just do this as is. Let's save this. Let's go back to the preview for my application. Okay. So we see here my my application, right? So I added in the libraries for Amplify. I've configured authentication. I am exporting my default app with Authenticator. And so basically what it's doing is it's stopping me from being able to get to that pretty little React web page that I've got over here that says yo, and asking me to authenticate. And so I need to sign up. And so I'm going to do that right now. And again, remember that I set some standards up for my application. And so I'm going to go now here and set this up. And I'm just going to do a placeholder phone number. I don't need all of you calling me. I know how you are. Just kidding. But let's see. Sign up. Okay. So again, one of the cool things that Kognito does is it will basically confirm that what I put in there is real. So it's going to send me a confirmation code to my email. And so let me actually just go and open up my email on my phone here. You can't see this, but I got a 6-digit code in my email. And so 853793 and say confirm. Okay, so it's confirmed me as a user. And now I should be able to come back in here and log in. And there we go. Awesome. So now I'm logged in. I can see this and things are great. Now, one thing that I do want to do is, because I'm logged into this app, let's say that I wanted to log out and get out of it, what would I do? Again, this is where my little helpful notes that I have here help me. And so what I'm going to do is include another component here that is a component of Amplify. And so it says it's basically going to allow me to log out and also going to tell me who I am logged in as. And so let me save that. And it's going to refresh. And so now up top here, we see that it says, hello, Muns, and I can sign out. And so I can sign out, I can sign back in. And actually, if I forget my password, it will allow me to go through a password reset flow. And again, I don't have to code any of that. That's all just built into Kognito. It's using the Amplify JavaScript to put together all the capabilities for me. And so basically adding just a couple of lines right to this. And now I've gone too far back. 1 second here. Just a couple of lines into this, I have everything that I need. Let me close this real quick. Cool. So we've added authentication. We've got authentication into our application. And I can create users, store users, and so forth. And so we're one step closer here to being able to power our back end. I'm going to pause again here real quick and take a look at questions that you might be having here. So a couple of questions here. So sorry, 1 second. Let me go through here. Sorry, trying to figure out where the questions start here. Okay, so that. Yep. So using Cloud9, which is an online IDE, completely hosted in the cloud. I've personally been moving to this from, instead of doing my own development environments, locally on my own workstation. So like for example, I've got my work laptop. I can go home and connect to the IDE via the console there without having to be on like my work laptop. Also in terms of, having an environment that maybe I'm including third-party software and I'm concerned about security risks. So there are some interesting security risks out there in the open source world. Being able to use the Cloud9 environment allows me to keep away my personal information and data from what I'm doing for developing code. And so that's why we're in here today. AWS Code Commit, in terms of credentials. So I already have my credentials configured on here, so you didn't get a chance to see that. But that is already in place. And so with Code Commit, there's a couple different options that you can use for those credentials. Is the GitHub repo public? What I'm doing right now isn't public, but everything that I'm walking through will be recorded. You'll be able to see this on the Twitch channel's recorded videos here, and so you'll be able to follow along as well. Okay. Sorry, I think someone said, where is the data stored for my user? So it's actually stored in Kognito. So we'll actually just real quick here, if I come back into my user sign-in, and let's say that I want to go and look at what's going on with my Kognito user store. So again, I'm now in the Kognito user pools interface, and I clicked on users and groups, and so I see that I have this one user created, which is my own. Now, if someone said, hey, we're not seeing this on the React app, what happened? Why can't we go in there and do that? That's because I haven't published it out yet. It's just local inside of my Cloud9 instance, and I'm using the ability for me to preview my application from inside of Cloud9. So right now, again, all that just lives in this environment. I have it done a publish up to my S3 bucket. And I'm going to wait a little bit before I do that, just so you guys aren't creating a whole bunch of users on me and filling this thing up with data before I'm ready for you too. Okay, sorry, just trying to make sure I got everything out here. Someone's asking here a question. I'll try to address as best I can. So AWS Mobile sounds great to get started with an app. When your app gets bigger, more developed, you need to move away from it to CloudFormation or something else. You shouldn't have to. Now, it is, again, creating a bunch of the resources for you via its framework. You could just as easily have other services and other things that are in CloudFormation that you're interfacing with those components from your stack here that's managed by AWS Mobile. So this doesn't, for example, preclude you from using other services. It does have just certain ones that it supports via the project framework, but that's totally up to you. Let me actually, real quick here, let's take a look at our Git code. And so we can do, git diff. We see what's changed. Awesome. So let's actually now just add this file. And push this. Awesome. Okay, we've created a React application. We initially pushed that up. We've now added authentication. Now what we're ready to do is add our backend service. And so for this, we're going to be using, again, another AWS service, in this case, one called AppSync. And so AppSync is a pretty cool service. It basically gives you a hosted GraphQL backend. And we'll talk a little bit more about here GraphQL in a second, but I'm actually going to kick off the creation of this and then come back to it. And so I'm going to come back in here to my console. I am going to go back into my directory for Ops events, and I'm going to do AWS Mobile, AppSync, enable -p. And so this is going to configure the AppSync backend for my application. I'm going to tell it to use Amazon Cognito user pools for authentication for my AppSync GraphQL backend. Now, what's cool here is that the command line knows about the rest of the stuff that it's created. And so it's automatically pulled in my user pool ID. So that's cool. It knows my default region. So that's good. And then the default action in this case is going to be allow. And we're all set. And so I'm going to do an AWS Mobile Push. And again, this is going to push settings back up to the AWS backend for these services. This is not a publish into my S3 bucket, so you do not yet have the ability to add your own users into this. I see a question here. Can you publish multiple apps using the same user pool? Yes, you could absolutely have a centralized user pool that you use across your business and your organization. Obviously, you want to be cautious about how they're modifying users in terms of your user flow, but you could definitely use user pools as a centralized user storage for your end customers, whatever have you, and connect to that from there. Cool. Awesome. Okay, so this is finished doing what it's doing, which is basically, again, talking to the backend AWS services and configuring them for me. Let's come back over here to the AppSync console and just do a refresh at this. Okay, and so I see now that I have my Office Events -Innovate application set up. I've got a bunch of app information here and a bunch of getting started stuff. And so let's talk a little bit more about GraphQL. So everyone following here probably has some sort of idea around the concept of APIs, programmatic interfaces that you build to interface between applications, between, say, mobile applications or web applications and backend technologies, providing the compute shim between your data and your customers. And so there have been a number of different technologies since kind of the early days of computing that represented the concept of APIs. One of the most popular ones that we've seen for maybe the last decade is REST-based APIs, HTTP APIs that use traditional HTTP verbs to get data, put data, delete data, represent the traditional interface capabilities that we would see inside of an application. GraphQL is a little different. Came out of, I believe, Facebook a couple of years ago. Really kind of growing in popularity. Companies like Starbucks use it, for example, for their mobile application. I'm a big Starbucks junkie, so I use that application pretty often. And it has a kind of a different way of how you interface and model your data and how you query your data. And so what it allows you to define is essentially a graph schema, which we're going to see here today, that represents our data, that represents models back to where the data is stored, such that when we make queries to the service, we can write what most consider to be a very simplistic syntax for taking that data and then representing it back in and out of our application. It kind of simplifies what you need to do to interface with it. So what AppSync does is it provides a hosted, basically, GraphQL front end, if you will, the front end of your API that sits between your client and various backend data sources. Today, it's got the ability to interface with a number of different backend technologies, DynamoDB, AWS Lambda, AWS Elasticsearch, as well as actually now HTTPS backends, I believe. And so we can integrate it in a lot of different ways. Now, in using the AWS mobile command to set this up, it created an AppSync API, if you will, for me, with a bunch of kind of defaults as part of a demo. And I can start with this and work with it and then take it forward from here. And so let's take a little look at the schema. And so I can come here underneath my Office Events Innovate API, and then I see here I've got schema, queries, data sources, and settings. And so if I look at the schema, I can kind of go through here, and I see that there are a couple of types. So I have a type of comment, and the comment has a bunch of attributes about it. It has an event ID, a comment ID, content, so the message itself. It has a created at string. There is a type of a comment connection that references the items in a comment. There is an event. So an event has an ID, has a name, a where, a when, a description. It can also then have comments that relate to that. And so you see here, this is kind of an interesting model, right? I have one type that then basically references a subtype as part of it. Again, this is one of the capabilities of GraphQL. I have an event connection. I have something here called a mutation. And so a mutation in GraphQL terminology is essentially allows me to modify data that's being stored by a backend service. And so I see here that I have a couple of different mutations defined. I have a create event, which again has supports the ability for me to set a name, a when, a where, a description. I have a delete event, and then I have a comment on event. And again, this is going to map back to the types for those specific data that I want to store. We see down here that I have a type of query, and so it supports here two different queries, a get event and a list event. So whereas a mutation is a modification of data, the query type is going to allow me to get data from the backend sources. There's also a concept of subscription. So AppSync does support things like WebSockets, so you can kind of do push data back out to your clients. We're not going to go into that really at all today in our demo, but it's something that you can definitely chase down yourself. And then we have a schema. And so the schema includes the overall representation here of our queries, our mutation, and the potential subscription that exists here. Now, over on the right, you'll see something called resolvers. And so resolvers are basically the things that are going to resolve a query for us. We see here that there are a bunch of these that are predefined, that I can attach resolvers onto the schema sources here. We can also, though, go over to data sources and see that I have a couple different data sources that have been created for me. So I have two different DynamoDB tables. One is called AppSync comment table. One is called AppSync event table. And I can actually go here and click through and go to the DynamoDB console and see these tables that are here. And then these are empty tables. There's no events in them right now, but we're going to add some here shortly. And then, actually 1 second here, if I come into comments. There we go, sorry, so that's right. So if I come down here to the queries of the schema, I see that some of these queries have been set up with a resolver. So essentially, when these queries are run, it's going to look to pull this data from these resolvers. So this is the AppSync event table. Let's click on this. And what I can see here is that the event table has a certain structure to it. And this basically wraps back to how it's going to interface with DynamoDB. And so the query that I'm going to make against here is going to be one of a string with context arguments of getting an ID. And this is for getting a singular event. Let me go and look at the comment table. Oops. Sorry, 1 second. Oops. Sorry. Schema. Sorry, if I go to the comment resolver, I'll see that it has a similar structure here. So it's got the query, how the query would be expressed as part of this, and then it's got an event ID context that is, again, going to tie the comments back to my event. And then I see down here that there's a mapping template. And again, this is for those queries. Let me go to the types that have been predefined. 1 second here. Let's go to our mutations, actually. Let's go to a mutation for create event. Awesome, that's what I was looking for. So again, we've got queries and mutations. Queries get things, mutations set or update things. So if I look at the mutation resolver that has been set for my create event command or my create event query that I could do, what I see here is that it's going to look for a certain syntax. So it's going to look for attributes to be set such as name, where, when, and the description. Again, this is the default that is baked into the AppSync create new API that's been set up here. You can go through manually, create your own. This is just kind of the example that's been set up. Now, just diving a little deeper into each of these lines here. So we see that the attribute has a name, essentially. We've then got, like, in quotes here, the letter S. This basically is for a string type. And then we see that we're going to expect this to be from context arguments name. So again, this is an aspect about the query here, that it's going to look to pull out this from the arguments name in this case. And then it shows me the response back to my mapping template. So for a successful run of this, what is it going to pass back? Well, it's going to pass back the entire context.results. However, I could filter and take basically sub aspects back out from this. So let's see here real quick. So let's go to queries. So AppSync does have a full kind of query tool inside of it, allowing me to query my data. Right now, I'm unauthorized because I haven't logged into it yet, and I did set up this AppSync API to require authentication. And so I need to log in with user pools. Now, in order to do this, I have to tell it where my user pool is. And so again, I can come down here, and in my exports.js, I see the AWS underscore user underscore pools underscore ID. So I'm going to pull that in and go back to the console and pass that in. I've got my username. So again, the username that I created to log in. Oops. Dun, dun, dun. Client ID. Satisfy. Do I have an extra category? Hold on 1 second. Let me try that again. Did it pull in the wrong thing, or did I copy the wrong thing? Let's see why it does not like my client ID here. Someone says I have a white space in the ID. Do I? Doesn't seem like I do. But it definitely doesn't seem like it's happy. Well, actually, let's just do this. Go to Kognito, user pools, general settings. Let's pull the ID from here and see if it likes this better. Maybe it didn't like the type that I took from someplace else. Huh. Well, once again, we're exploring in real time here on Twitch. And so that's kind of strange. Anyone have any ideas? Sorry, looking at questions here. Yeah, this is strange. So what I was hoping that it would allow me to do, and I'm actually going to take a screenshot of this so that I can go back to the team later and say, hey, what did I do wrong here? Actually, you know what, real quick, let me go back to another one that I have set up. And this one worked for me earlier. That That's strange. I don't know if this is a GUI issue that I just ran into, which would be strange, or something else that I've done silly. Yeah. All right. We're going to have to jump past this part here. Yeah, I know. So it's basically telling me that it doesn't like underscores, I think, in the client ID, or it's picking up a character somewhere. Let's see, app ID. No, so it should be this here. It should be the pool ID, client ID, pools. Oh, wait, maybe it's this ID here. Let's see. Maybe I'm picking the wrong ID. Oops. Whoa. Ah, that'll do it. Thank you for who called that out there. Golden Brown 111, you helped put me down the right path. So thank you very much. Awesome. So we're now logged in here. And so this would allow me to run queries. And so I don't have any queries predefined here, but what I can basically do is go and get some. And so I know what my data kind of looks like. So I can do query, and then I can say from inside of here, 1 second. I have this here. Yes. So I can say query list events, and I can then call list events. And then from inside of this, I would say items, and I'm going to say ID and name, and run. What am I missing here? Oh. What are you not happy about here? Single post. Sorry, now I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing, what I'm missing wrong here again. Is it that this needs to be like that? Oh yeah, let's see if that does it for me. Right. So basically what this is doing is it's saying, run a query that I've called list events, and I can call this anything. I can call this Bob123. And what it's doing is calling the list events actual query inside here, and I'm asking for the items, and I'm trying to get back the ID and name of those items. Now, this is a completely empty database. Again, right, if I come back over to this here and I look at the event table, there is nothing in here. So let's actually go and add some data to this. And so we'll now do a mutation, and we'll call this like insert event. And again, inside of the AppSync query editor here, it actually gives you a little hint of like what this would need to look like. And so in this case, if we remember back to our schema, let me open that up in another window here real quick. We know that inside of our schema, the mutations that we support are create event, delete event, or comment on event. And so we're going to do a create event. We're just going to cheat a little bit here. And we're going to name our event Summer Party. When is going to be Thursday. Where, we'll say Central Park. And we're going to say that this is, sorry, checking the comments here real quick. Oh, okay, and we're going to say the description is our start of summer party. So now if we were to do this, it's going to give us an error because it's like this thing here. Say insert event. And so it's now gone and inserted this event for us. And now if we go back and we run our list event, which I've called Bob123, we get back our one event. So now we have summer party. So that's cool. Let's actually throw in here another event. So let's do end of summer party. And let's actually give this a little bit more of a formal date. We'll say September 1st, 2018. where we'll say battery park or not, and say our end of summer party. And let's go ahead and run this now as well too. Great. So it comes back, tells me the ID of this event that's been created. If I come here and run my Bob123 event, which again is just running a list of events, I see that I now have 2 records that have been stored. If I go up to DynamoDB and I'm in the Items tab and I refresh this, I now see that I have, again, my 2 events that are here, and I see all the information about them, and that's awesome. So we are up and running. We have data in AppSync. We can authenticate. Now what do we do from here? So what we have to do is actually come back to our application and do something more with this. So let's actually look at what we're going to have to do. So we actually go back to the Amplify documentation, and we come up here and click on API. And then from there, we click on Working with GraphQL. So what it's going to do here is bring us into the directions for GraphQL and walk us through potentially all the things that we do need to do, or that we could do, I should say. And so there are a whole bunch of things that we can do. We can manually configure a GraphQL server. We could set up authentication, or we could basically do configuration here with AppSync. And so we've gone through a good part of this already, and we have already set up our exports and all that good stuff. We don't need to worry about keys. We've already got our Kognito pool set up. But now we can basically just get into query declarations and setting up what we need to get stuff from our application. And so if we scroll down through here and we get past all the initial examples, we can come down here to React components. And again, Amplify is going to provide us with certain aspects of being able to simplify what it is that we need to write inside our application. And so I am going to go here and I'm going to copy what they have here inside of the render for this application, for this example, and I'm going to replace what's currently in the render of my app.js. Okay. Now, if we go and we save this, it's going to, so back here in Cloud9, so Cloud9 provides useful helpers. So it tells me here that I am, that the GraphQL operation is not defined. And if we actually come back in here to Amplify, we'll see that there are some other things that I need to include. So I also need to include the GraphQL component from the Amplify package. So as well as auth, I'm going to include GraphQL. So I'm going to save that. And then I think there might be one other thing here. I need to import connect from AWS Amplify. Okay, so let's go ahead and preview this. And if I preview my running application, something interesting is happening. So we're seeing here, again, I'm looking at this locally, it's just flashing and then going away. And so the reason that's happening is because this code is not aware of the fact that I have authentication in place, and it's basically seeing, it doesn't know that what's happening from down below here is basically stealing away the ability for me to see my site, because the authentication is trying to pop up, but then also it's trying to run the query and it's not able to display that. So what I need to do is change down here the return such that I can basically tell it to, hey, wait until I load the page, let me authenticate, and then you can run that query. Now, I'm going to cheat a little bit here again, going back to my cooking shows example. I happen to have this code running someplace else. So I am just going to go in here and actually copy from the other example. And we're going to build up through all of this here through the rest of the day. But just due to time, I realize I'm running a little long right now. Okay. So again, I've taken from my already baked cake, or already cooked meal, and brought into this new one here. So what this is basically doing is it's going to see if I'm loading, it's going to return a div that says like, hey, I'm loading. If there are any errors, it's going to come back and tell me what those errors are. And if for any reason otherwise, basically what it's going to do is go and list the events for me. And again, this is stuff that's part of how React is going to draw my interface. So let's go back and try to preview my running application again. And so as we see here, I'm already authenticated. It had my session information stored. And so I see now my events, right? So these are the 2 events that we put into AppSync. And here they are. So from my Cloud9 instance, where my code is, using my Cognito authentication, it has pulled out this data from my AppSync GraphQL. Now, actually, I kind of zoomed past this before, but from the example code, and again here from the Aws Amplify information documentation, it has two things here inside of the render block that are relevant to me here. It is going to create a list view. So it's basically going to take the results that it gets back from my event and map it out. And now I could do something prettier with this. I could add, good CSS and make it look nicer. Not terribly relevant for today. But if we come down here, what we see is another concept called list events. And so this list event is a GraphQL query. So we see here that we have query, it's called list events, and then it's actually calling the list event type that was part of our GraphQL schema. So if you remember when we were in GraphQL, actually I'll just go back over here to AppSync, and we look at the schema, there was a type for an event. And if we went and looked at the various resolvers that we had for event, find it, query here, we have a query for list events, and we can click on that, and it tells us what happens when we do a list event, right? So this is part of the AppSync schema being represented over here, being displayed. So when my page loads, it checks to see if I'm authenticated. If it is, then it's going to go forward and it's going to execute this AppSync query for me and make the information there available. So let me go back in here again to this. And if I sign out, so again, I'm now currently unauthenticated from the application. Let me sign back in. And great, here I am. So we're able to pull data out. Let's see what we would have to do if we wanted to put data back into this function. Again, I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I'll try to walk through what it is that I'm doing to cheat. So I'm going to go back to my already finished version of this. And there's a couple things I need to do. First, I'm going to create another component inside of my application. So come back up to the top here. Create this component. Inside this component now, so what I want to do now is be able to put events into this application, right? So I'm able to pull them out, and I could go into the AppSync console, and I could definitely continue to add records to there, but that's not going to really be useful for the users of my application. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a form essentially to this application to allow users to go in and add events to it. So let me come back over here, and again, just trying to be mindful of time. And so I'm going to add another renderer here. It's going to render just a really straightforward, again, form. We've got text records for name, for description, for when, and for where. And there's going to be a button that's going to render that is called Create Event. So let me actually just save this real quick. I need to come down here, and I need to take the main app that I am exporting, and I need to add now this new button, or this new event here. So we're going to add this component. Where did that do that? Oh no. Sorry. Come in here. Boop. Let me close my div. Okay. So let's actually preview this. Let's see what happens. I know that I'm missing a bunch of things. All right, cool. So it's gone here again. It is rendering this form inside of my web application. And so I could say, enter things, and the name, I could say Labor Day party. Description, celebrate Labor Day. When? September 4th or something like that, I think. Where? My place. And say create event. And it's not going to do anything because I haven't actually created the action that's going to render from, that's going to execute from this submit form. But that's okay. So let me actually, again, go back here. And I'm going to, again, steal some of the things that I need. So inside of this component here, I need a constructor. And so the constructor is going to represent essentially the aspects about this component. It's going to store state for me as part of the interface. And so the state is going to, again, represent the key attributes of an event. So I've got my name, my description, my where, my when. And then what I need to do is actually two different things. So one is I need to handle the actual submit of my action. But then also I'm going to handle a change to one of the fields in my form. And it's already kind of actually represented down here in the form itself where I say on change this dot handle change. But what this is going to do, or the handle change function I should say, is basically take the data that was entered into that field on the form, store it back into the basically the state of the attributes or the records that I'm going to save for the application. And then I need to actually have my handle submit function. So let me save and copy this. Okay. Now what this is doing is pretty straightforward here. So again, this function is called handle submit. This is tied down to the button on click command for my create event. And what we see inside here is that there is, again, a constant for create event, and this is a mutation. And now, actually, where did this come from? So if I go back into my Amplify documentation and I scroll up a little bit here, what I will actually find is that if I see the examples here for mutations, it actually already has this example here for me. But it actually also has here that I could consume event details from here, but again, I'm going to take it from my web form. And so again, the Amplify documentation can walk you through most of what we're doing here today. I'm going to cut around some corners here. Now, one other thing, or actually two other things I need to do here is I need to include another component of the Amplify JavaScript. So let me go up here and import this next to my GraphQL operation. And that was because, again, Cloud9 had a little warning icon here letting me know that things were not quite right. And so if I save this and I go to preview my application, and I'm logged in, so we will say, we'll call this a fall party. Start a fall party. When? We'll do this one on September 15th. Where? We'll do this at, where are we going to do this one? We'll do this one at the East River Park. Create event. All right, so that's there. Now let's refresh this interface. And what we see here is that my fall party has been added to my events. And my field, my form here has been reset. So again, what we've done basically via the create handler here is it is executing a mutation. The mutation is consuming the state of the application running inside of my browser and running the GraphQL operation for the mutation, which again is a create event. This create event looks just like the create event that I ran earlier from the AppSync console. And now the data is stored back in the service. And again, if I go into AppSync and I come here to queries and I run my Bob123 query, I'll see all three of these here exist. Actually, let me just update this here. Let's take the description here as well. All right, so I get my descriptions for all these. If I come back here to my DynamoDB database and refresh this, I'll see it here as well. So again, what I've got here is my application running locally. What I'd like to now do is now publish this. So I can come back here to my command line and run Aws Mobile Publish. So while I'm doing this, let me just check on questions and stuff here. How am I doing on time?
We're at 2:51, but
over? Okay.
Everyone's still watching, so.
Let's see here. Sorry, everyone. I should have checked for questions a little bit sooner. My apologies. Someone asked, is there, at one point I think I saw here, is there the ability to interface with, say, MongoDB with this? You could do that via a Lambda resolver in AppSync. So with Lambda, AWS Lambda is a compute service that we have here at AWS, allows you to write small bits of code that can be executed essentially at an invocation or an event time. You could create a Lambda resolver in AppSync to talk to MongoDB and essentially pull data out of that as a database. You could also use that in front of relational databases as well. 1 second here. Let me try to go through here. Sorry, trying to catch up. Yeah, everyone help me with getting the Cognito identifier. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The create event and didn't refresh to show. Why is that? Yes, so the question there is when I click create event, it didn't refresh to show that. So I didn't actually program it to refresh the page in that case, and so that's something that I could have put into the view to basically on that click also run the list event again. But that's something else we could have done. So this is here. Let me actually go back to my S3 app and refresh this. And so it wants me to sign in. So again, this is now what's hosted up in the cloud, as it were, in S3. And actually, let me back up even further here. I think that I should be able to see this via CloudFront now. Let's see if it's going to do it. Yes. Okay. So let's go and log in. Awesome. So I see here that Corey has already added an event. So this is, again, here live. Please be friendly. Please do nice things. Please don't say mean things inside of this, because we are sharing this with everyone. That would be very not nice. But you can actually go now to this application. You can sign into it, create an account, and you have to use a valid email address so that I can send you the confirmation code. But I can come in here and I can say, let's add a holiday party. Celebrate. When we're going to do this in, we'll say December 15th, 2018. Where? Corey's apartment, clearly. Create event. Go ahead and refresh this. Awesome. So now we've got Corey's event, or sorry, we've got the holiday party. I actually called it party. My apologies here. Awesome. So people here are adding some events. That's a good time. And someone had an event called Donkey. Sure, why not? But cool. So we're kind of at the end of the time here today for this session. I think we're just a little bit long. My apologies for that. But let's kind of recap what we did. And actually, let's do the last thing that we really should do, which is add our code. So we're going to do git add star add backend git push. Cool. So how are we going to summarize what we did here today? Well, actually, this is a great reason for using source control service. We're going to come in here, and we're going to look at our commit history. So what have we done here today kind of throughout this workshop? Well, we started with a blank repository, blank directory, blank Git repository inside of a Cloud9 instance. Again, Cloud9 is a managed cloud-based IDE for you with like deep integration into AWS's tools. We created a generic React application. So it was that basic React app that just said yo. We then went and added authentication to it using Kognito. And so actually, let's go here and see everyone who has created some sort of an ID. It shouldn't show me like any of your personal information, it just has your names and stuff here. So thank you. I like waffles. That's a good one. So here's all that. So we created the authentication mechanism. We added that to our application. We had to do basically 2 lines to add an authentication interface into our application that has a sign out button, that has technically password reset capabilities, all sorts of other stuff like that. Then we added a GraphQL backend to our application using AppSync. And again, we just used the AWS Mobile CLI, created a default there. It came with basically the setup for the schema and the queries and the mutations all created for us. We inserted some data into it. And then we added that into our React application. Again, just a couple lines of code here. You can find those examples in the Aws Amplify page. And then we published this live. And so now all of you are using this. Again, it's been just about an hour or so. We can now all go and celebrate these various events that we're looking forward to here. And that's cool stuff. I'm going to look real quick here for some last minute questions. I know there's another session out of this. I'm taking up too much of their time.
He's the last one.
Oh, I'm the last session. Never mind. You are stuck here for like 5 more hours. No, just kidding.
We have about 20 minutes until the closing remarks for Innovate.
Okay, cool. So we got a couple minutes before there's closing here. Thank you. So we've done a bunch of stuff here. Again, gluing this all together, one thing that I haven't had to do throughout this entire hour is set up a server, configure a server, log into a server, scale a server. In fact, we could sit here and hit this endpoint really, really heavily, and it's just going to scale and work for us. There's really not a whole lot that we would have to do to scale or manage this. DynamoDB is a very heavily durable NoSQL database. AppSync can support massive scale. CloudFront and S3 can also support massive scale. So again, a completely serverless application. Again, no servers to manage, no servers to patch, no servers to think about in running all of this. Our code is basically going to execute and live in the browser. We've got user authentication and management put together. Again, pretty straightforward. And so you can use this for all sorts of things. Again, we didn't do anything pretty here with the CSS. We probably could have added other data types into our GraphQL database, but hopefully you've been able to get a good sense of what this is. Let me look and turn here to some questions and see what is going on. And so someone actually asked here, it's only showing a couple of the events. Why is that? So yes, in fact, what it is doing is it's only returning 10 events. There is an iterator that I could use to basically have it go and iterate through the list and show me the rest of them. I'm sure if I come to DynamoDB here and refresh this, y'all have been able to add in here 53 events. So there is a bunch of other events that are here, but it is only going to show me the first 10. If we went to the API documentation for Amplify, we could actually work through basically what's required in doing a query that needs to basically iterate on top of the iterator. But I'm going to leave that as your homework assignment for today and something that you can take away from here. Other questions here. Let me try to follow up. Someone asked the question here of, can I modify the AppSync schema and definitions from outside of the console? Yes, you can. You can definitely do that via API. You can do that via, I believe, also CloudFormation today. And so you can modify that. Someone asked a question of, can you have data on preview for test and other data on production and just change the client ID? So I could deploy a completely separate stack of this application if I wanted to, and essentially separate or segment out data that way. You could potentially do something slightly smarter inside your application with, say, like having a custom attribute to say if data was production or testing. But I usually prefer to have just completely separate stacks for that. So in that case, I'd basically have a whole new AppSync backend, a whole separate Cognito user pool creation for all of that. So there's a question of what kind of cost will this app have as is? So that's a great question. So if we go and we go to, one second here. Oh, actually, let me see here. Go back to AppSync. Go to AppSync. Actually, let's tell you. So again, with AWS, pricing is always live online. So we can see here that query operations, make this a little bit bigger, would be for 5 million of them. It's basically the pricing is $4 per million queries. So we'd take quite a while before we hit those million queries. For Cognito user pools, can you tell them real quick? It's basically based on the per monthly active user. And so the first 50,000 users are free. So all of you are free today. Beyond there, we're at half a penny and change and up. And then for S3 and for CloudFront, it's also a very small cost. So I am in US East Virginia. My storage costs are 0.023, so basically 2 cents and change per gigabyte for the first 50 terabytes. And then for CloudFront pricing, it's also similarly pretty small here. First 10 terabytes in the States are at approximately 8.5 cents. So everything I did here today is like less than a nickel, basically. But we could run this for quite cheap as scale, again, without me having to manage the resources. So at this point, I think I actually have to end here for today. We're a bit over time. People are trying to kick me out of my conference room. That's what happens in a busy office. But I want to thank you all here. Thank you all for joining us here today as part of this. It's been a lot of fun interfacing with you. Hopefully you've had a bit to take away. Again, check out Aws Amplify, really awesome JavaScript framework that can interface with, React and some of the other JavaScript frameworks that are out there. AppSync helped make our lives really awesome in managing a GraphQL backend. And then being able to use Kognito to essentially manage our user pool and manage our users without having to think about it. Really awesome way to do it with a lot of cool security capabilities. My name is Chris Munns. You can find me at Munns, M-U-N-N-S, at Amazon.com or at Chris Munns on Twitter. I'm the lead developer evangelist for Serverless and look forward to seeing you here on Twitch again real soon.
Are we making an announcement?